Well, hey now, welcome to Fitz's Electric Bar. And it's been a little bit of a while since I've done kind of a new post. I've had a few things in the can that I've put out just to kind of keep some regularity. But I've been recently somewhat inspired by what I would call one of my deep immersive experiences. I do this periodically where usually it's triggered by a book, an autobiography or a biography on a musician that I really like. And if it's a really good read, I will also combine that with re-listening to the music. Often as I read about the artist and their history and the context where they were making the music, I will start to re-listen to their music as well, and just find that I get kind of completely drawn in. Sometimes I'll watch a documentary or two. And I've done this with Joni Mitchell. I think it was Reckless Daughter was a book that was written about her and her life and her career. Did it with Gordon Lightfoot, Ricky Lee Jones, and others like that. Robbie Robertson and the band, and his book, which I thought was great, Testimony. The latest one for me was triggered by this, which is a biography on Lou Reed, written by Will Hermes. Really enjoyed the book. I just finished it today. And it was a really good read, goes through some of his early life, which I usually don't find all that interesting in any biography. That's a confession of mine. Usually the story of the parents and growing up, I realize it's an important part of the story in terms of the artists. The early days can inform who they are and how they approach their art later in life, but I don't generally find that stuff super interesting, so I usually try to go through that pretty quickly. But this was done well and quite concise. It definitely gets into the early days of his love of doo-wop music, and he's famously, I guess, grew up on 50s rock and roll stuff, so Dion and a lot of the girl groups and doo-wop stuff, which is so kind of interesting because when you think about Lou Reed as a singer-songwriter and his arc, mostly you think about a guy who represents kind of New York, the edgy art, our sort of artistic, more avant-garde side of music, and yet there's a lot of his music which is absolutely beautiful, beautiful melodies, if not necessarily doo-wop components to it. You might be able to see the thread there on things like Coney Island Baby or even Walk on the Wild Side. But Lou Reed, the King of New York. So a little bit of context. So, who is Lou Reed? Well, most of you who are fans of Lou Reed would think of him as somebody who's extremely passionate, who's very irascible, very opinionated, drug addict, very interesting in terms of his involvement with Andy Warhol through the Velvet Underground and the Plastic Inevitable. Exploding Plastic Inevitable, EPI, I think were the initials. So that's kind of a big part of what we think about with Lou Reed. But in looking at and reading the book, it also gets into a lot of the stuff that maybe he's not as well known for. So intense loyalty, tremendous tenderness, real interest in the arts beyond what he creates. A lot of his latter day life, he and his partner Laurie Anderson went to a lot of art openings, went to see bands. He was interested in the whole CBGB scene and that kind of thing. Very appreciative and disciplined, which is interesting because you kind of think about his life, and especially with drug addiction, you don't think about that as being a quality of discipline, of self-discipline, but he got really into Tai Chi and really enjoyed that. And I think perhaps it was to balance out his other tendencies towards self-indulgence and things like that. So discipline was kind of the yang to the yin, I guess. But he also was famous for just hating being interviewed by journalists, almost always taking a very defensive, antagonistic kind of approach when he was interviewed, almost always. And I thought about that a little bit as I read the book. I think I mentioned this before a little bit, but I think an artist often hates being categorized. And one of the jobs often of a journalist is to try to make sense of an artist, try to figure out, what are their themes? What is it that they are communicating, trying to put them into a box in a sense in terms of what kind of artist they are, trying to make sense of the artist, I guess, is part of the communication of a journalist for often. And Lou Reed was certainly somebody who was very open about his distrust and hatred of being put in a box, and usually was very contrarian in his interviews. And when he was asked about certain things or certain conclusions were drawn, he usually was very negative. He would have these blanket statements. He seemed to just hate Frank Zappa. He talked in one of his interviews, at least one of his interviews, about like British musicians as being just crap, just a blanket. They're just crap. And yet, if you love something, he would speak very, very highly of that music and of that artist. So, very interesting guy. And this book, I think, was really well done. And again, the reason why I think it was good is that it was neither a hatchet job, really trying to kind of bury Lou Reed, nor was it overly fawning. It was very informative. I found myself going back and really being intrigued by a lot of the Velvet Underground stuff, and also Lou's solo career. He really goes through all of his solo works, provides context for them in terms of what Lou was up to at the time. He talks about some of the wonderful things that he did when he would support certain artists. Anani, was Anthony and the Johnsons before that, and how supportive he was of Anani. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. And working with Metallica and things like that, which is really interesting. Excuse me. He also was an absolute control freak. And it's an interesting thing when you think about great artists, be they actors or filmmakers or whatever. Often they'll be criticized for being super controlling. And it may be that they have a very clear idea of their vision and they want their vision made. But, some of the sort of unsavory aspects when it was talking about Lou Reed was getting back together again with the Velvet Underground and doing a tour of Europe, I think around 1991, I guess, and around there. Lou was insisting on total control. And when you think about the other performers, Mo Tucker on drums and Sterling Morrison on guitar and John Cale piano and viola and other assorted instruments, these were not side musicians, right? These were founding members, and certainly in the case of Cale and maybe to a lesser extent Sterling Morrison, tremendous contributions to the creation of the music in the first place. And Lou, I guess, the beginning of the tour, they worked well together, but Lou was demanding complete control over the choice of like how it was arranged and how it was performed and what was performed and everything. And I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I think he had a falling out. He'd had multiple falling outs with John Cale, but had a complete lasting falling out, I think, with John Cale over some of that stuff. And so that's kind of sad to hear about that kind of thing, but highly recommend it. Lou Reed, King of New York. Give it a read if you can. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the tribute record. This record, some real reflection. This is a really nice package, actually, from Light in the Attic, but the Power of the Heart and a tribute to Lou Reed. And this is an excellent tribute. First of all, the record itself, a really nice package. It comes with a really good, like a great liner notes and great tribute to Lou Reed. And it's substantial and it's comprehensive, and it talks about the artists involved in the project. And I really enjoyed this, and it's nice having a package like this. It's got a little bit of a higher price point, 50 Canadian, I think is what I paid for it. But I think well worth it. But of course, the main thing, as Mazzy would say, is it's all about the music, stupid. And the music is very good. So I think one of the tracks that gets a lot of attention is the Keith Richards' I'm Waiting for the Man, which is just so obvious as being a perfect fit. And Keith, does his dirty sort of guitar stuff and instant credibility in terms of Keith doing I'm Waiting for the Man. Maxime Ludwig, who I don't know, and Angel Olsen, who I do a cover of I Can't Stand It. Excellent, just like driving rock and roll. Rufus Wainwright does a straight up reading of Perfect Day, much like Lou does it on Transformer. It's really nice. You can imagine such a beautiful song, and Rufus Wainwright has such a lush, beautiful voice, so that's great. Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, I'm not a huge fan, but I'm So Free off of Transformer. Excellent version, nice rock and roll. Bobby Rush, Sally Can't Dance. Sally Can't Dance is a real kind of funky song, right? It's got a real sort of funk groove. And I don't know Bobby Rush, but delivers it even funkier. And so it's a really nice remake of that song. And then Ricky Lee Jones does kind of an interesting sort of jazzy, meandering version of Walk on the Wild Side. I'm not sure about how I feel about that. But I like the fact that it's very different than Lou's version, so that you got something to compare it to. So compare and contrast. The Afghan Wigs do I Love You, Suzanne. Excellent. It's pure Afghan Wigs if you're a fan of them. It's got their sound just embedded all over it, and I love that tune. Mary Gauthier, Coney Island Baby, also kind of a straight up version, much like the album version, the title track of Coney Island Baby, but very nice reading of it. Really like it. Lucinda Williams, Legendary Hearts, the only one that's kind of like, I'm not so sure. I mean, maybe a little bit like the Ricky Lee Jones. It's okay. I don't love that, and I like Lucinda Williams. Automatic, I don't know Automatic. I just kind of looked them up on Wikipedia. They're an Australian act, but New Sensations, really good. They do kind of a bit of an electronic version of it. If you know that title track off of New Sensations, this is a really it's a really good version, and it really suits the song, and I really like it. It's when a tribute record really works, it's when it does a kind of a reworking and makes it something different and brings out something in the record. And I love that. And then Roseanne Cash does Magician. I love that song off of Magic and Loss, and she does a really nice version of that. Interesting, in the book, they mention that they met at the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert at Madison Square Gardens. And he got her phone number, and they were going to maybe go out on a date. And Roseanne sort of mentioned in the book that it never would have worked out. They're just two different people for sure. So again, The Power of the Heart, highly recommend this really nice tribute record. That's a great picture of Lou. My experience of Lou has been many different live shows. And the first live show I saw him was the Rock and Roll Heart one, which famously had banks of television monitors showing various images, including just white noise and static. And for most of the show, you couldn't even see Lou perform. He was just a shadow. And I remember being kind of irritated by it. And as I look back on that, it was like, what a great way to first see Lou, is an artistic expression that was very much of his making. So that was really cool. And at the end of that show, I did White Light, White Heat, and I think Heroin. But I remember White Light, White Heat, and it was fantastic. And the spotlight was on him, and it was very intense, and that was a great experience. Another time I saw Lou was the Bells tour at the El Macombo in Toronto. Don't remember much about the show, but just being able to see Lou in a club setting. He, did shows at the Bottom Line in New York. And in fact, that was also part of one of his live albums, Live and Dangerous, was done at the Bottom Line. But you didn't normally, outside of New York, you didn't get a chance to see Lou in a club. He was already kind of a star. So that was a really cool experience. Also, New Sensations tour, saw him, I think it was at Canada's Wonderland. That was really good. I think he was sort of cleaning up his act in terms of his health. And it was a really good show, and I really enjoyed that. I saw the Raven tour at Bumbershoot in Seattle. That was okay. Didn't love that phase of Lou's career, but he was always somebody that was interesting to check out. Whatever it was that he was doing, it was always worthwhile, whether it was something you really enjoyed or something that wasn't particularly good, but it was part of his history, as it were. And then another one, I've shown this before, but it was around the time of New Sensations, and it was a poetry reading, Lou Reed and Jim Carroll at the Music Hall on the Danforth in Toronto. And they read their lyrics. Both of the, well, Jim Carroll seemed like really wired. I mean, he seemed like he was on amphetamines. I have no idea, but he seemed like he was just hanging by a thread. Lou seemed much healthier. And again, reading a lot of the stuff off of, I remember New Sensations like Fly Into the Sun and stuff like that off of that record. And that was really cool. These are records that left a big impression on me, and most of them are still albums that I really enjoy and still listen to. The one exception might be Berlin. It's not that I don't like it, it's just that it is a kind of harrowing record. And when it first came out, I absolutely loved it. I was not in a good place in my life. I mean, not to get all melodramatic, but just, kind of dealing with, coming of age and trying to come to terms with who you are and not necessarily feeling good about yourself. And listening to Berlin felt like a really good compliment, as it were, to where I was at psychologically. And I'm not in that place anymore. And so it feels like something that is in my past. As great as the music is, as great as a piece of art as this is, it's not something I generally reach for when I'm listening to Lou Reed. I think the one that, not surprisingly, was kind of the liftoff for me was Transformer. I often think of this album and Lou Reed in particular, but this album in particular, I guess. Also David Bowie, who produced and sang backup vocals and I think some piano on this. And Roxy Music, those three acts, as it were, those two artists in that one band, really for me were the jumping off point to a different form of music. At the time, I was really interested in what's now called classic rock and roll, Bad Company, Foghat, Aerosmith, that kind of stuff. And when I heard this album, this might have been the first. Also around the same time, I think I listened to this. I would have started listening to this in high school, maybe a couple of years after this was released. Same kind of thing went for Ziggy Stardust with David Bowie, and Roxy Music. I think Stranded was the first, but the album that I got into most deeply with Roxy Music was Country Life, Prairie Rose. Those three acts, I suppose, were the ones that kind of opened up my world to so much more than what I was listening to in high school. And I still find this a wonderful record. This is the Speaker's Corner release. The production on this, again, with Bowie, did just such a great job. And the sound that Speaker's Corner and the mastering that they did on this, fantastic. It is so crisp, clear, with lots of bottom end, great sort of separation, and the songs just lift right off the vinyl. Fantastic. And it holds up so well. I mean, it's known for Walk on the Wild Side, but, Vicious is great. Andy's Chest, just a story about Andy Warhol and after he was shot. Perfect Day, we all know. Hanging Around is a great tune. Side two's a little bit weaker, but it's got Satellite of Love and I'm So Free. It's got a couple kind of cabaret throwaways, I feel. New York Telephone Conversation and Good Night Ladies. It's kind of fun, but Makeup is kind of a good song as well. But Transformer still holds up really well. I think the next one that really got me into Lou was this live album, Rock and Roll Animal. As somebody pointed out in the comments of my ranking video, the crowd going wild. Well, it wasn't really the crowd at a Lou Reed concert, apparently. Like the recording of this is also very good. It's an excellent live record, both in terms of the audio quality as well as the performance. And Steve Hunter and Dick Wagner. Was it Steve Hunter? But the guitar work in this is fabulous. But the audience mic apparently failed, and so they actually rolled in the audience of a John Denver concert, which seems just almost like ridiculous. But so it's not a real Lou Reed crowd at this performance, but really, really good. So Rock and Roll Animal, fabulous. Another one that I still really, really love is Coney Island Baby. My vinyl got destroyed, but Crazy Feeling. Charlie's Girl, great song. She's My Best Friend. Kicks, which is so obviously an amphetamine rush kind of song. It's really just like very nerve-wracking, but interesting to play periodically. A Gift, very funny. I'm just a gift to the women of the world. It shows Lou at his funniest. And then the title track, Coney Island Baby, which is very, very touching. He sends it out to himself and his partner, Rachel Humphreys, as well. And they talk about that relationship in the book, which is really, really good. So that's really good. And a latter day record that I've, well, I say latter day, I guess this was, what would be the year of this? 1992, but this was after he lost a couple people in his life, and it's Magic and Loss. And this is an excellent record. Also quite heavy, but quite touching. Lou could be, again, just in terms of his personality, in terms of his music, both savage and heavy and in your face and aggressive, like in good ways and in maybe not so good ways, or at least in artistic ways, but not in pleasant ways. But he could also be so tender and so sweet and just lovely. And so Magic and Loss is one that I think is great. And I come away from reading the book and I realized that an album that I don't know so well, but that people keep talking about being such a great record, is The Blue Mask. So I'm going to be starting to give this a good listen coming out of my Lou Reed immersive period. I've been looking at also some of the interviews that he did, and there's some really interesting interviews, and some of them are just kind of like irritating because he's like a 2-year-old with his no and that's shit and all that kind of stuff. But, as I sort of give my personal analysis and subjectivity to Lou Reed, I can just imagine like him over my shoulder just saying, you're full of shit, Fitz, you're wrong. And that would be so Lou. So there it is, Lou Reed. A little bit about the new biography, as well as the tribute album, and kind of an appreciation of someone that is a big part of my listening life, and someone I always go back to, and also a connection to New York and my love of the city, and can't think about that without thinking Lou Reed. Carpe diem.